All right. Now for today's session, it's going to be more of an interactive one. I know that, Jim, are you still okay to do your little bit on this?
Yeah, I've got about a 13 slide, 10-minute program on using the Raman.
Excellent. All right. Well, we'll do that in a little while. Well, I've got a few slides as well, which I'll pop up in a minute. And what I'd like to do is just have anybody that has any comments or input or feedback or whatever into it to speak up as well. And we'll see where we get to with this particular session. So I might start off by, let me share screen on that one. Now I just need to move a couple of things out the way. So everybody can see that, yes?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I just need to also get rid of that one and do that.
Gold or something else.
Yes, exactly. All right. So the first screen is challenges. Now, particularly with micros, small size is always a challenge because you can't necessarily do some of the sort of tests that you would like to be able to do to try and determine what an unknown specimen actually is. On the plus side, sometimes you'll have more material to actually use, but it's very difficult to do things like, specific gravity or hardness tests and things like that under most circumstances. There are a lot of mineral species that are very similar to one another in terms of looks. And if you're using things like, color, habit and whatever as an identification tool, that's one way to do it, but you may not necessarily find what you're looking for because there are similar species. Even within a species, you've got different habits and colors and so on. So it can be quite challenging to determine something based on what you think it should look like. Then we have issues, and we were talking about this last night on another Zoom call that we had, the more sort of social one. Thanks, Paul. Paul's sending me a what mineral is that picture, which is catite, I think, or something along those lines. Maybe it's white catite. You have series of minerals, and you can have solid solutions between them. So an example there is where you've got libethenite and olivenite, depending on how much phosphate or arsenate is actually in it. But also with the olivenite, you've got a series with adamite as well. And again, we were talking about this yesterday, the adamites and olivenites at Broken Hill can be very difficult to tell apart because you just don't know where the line is drawn in terms of that series. Then we have probably one of the biggest bugbears at the moment, the advances in science. So things like having chavasite, which is now a series name, but having, I think, 5 different chavasites to pick from. Tetrahedrite, which I think is now up to 6. I think there was a new one came out in March, which was tetrahedrite CD, a cadmium tetrahedrite. And then you got things like wavelite and fluorowavelite, and the number of wavelites that are turning out to be fluorowavelite, but they look identical. It's very difficult to get to a definitive identification on those. And then you have things like different chemical compositions just in a single crystal. So rather than mixtures and integrates and stuff like that, tourmalines, for instance, one crystal could actually be 3 different species depending on where you look in the actual crystal.
Yeah, and to make things worse, you've got pseudomorphs.
And you've got pseudomorphs as well. I should have added that to the list. Thank you, Frank. All right, so if you're looking at what you can do about this, research, there's a number of things you can do. The first thing you probably should not do is assume that you've got something new or something particularly rare. It's quite likely that you've got something common, and you probably should be exhausting that first. And I'm guilty of this as well. I'll come to a little case study in a minute, where I was quite excited about something. And it is likely that, I mean, rare does mean rare. So it is likely that what you've got is perhaps not rare and probably not new. But you can look at things like the geological environment. You know, you've got certain environments where certain minerals just physically can't exist. And you can eliminate things as well as identify, going through that process. Of course, you can look on MinDat for the locality and check the mineral lists. Problem with that, of course, is that MinDat is crowdsourced, and there is a fair bit of misinformation, not intentional, but particularly in the early days. Hang on, just got Becca coming in. Particularly in the early.
Steve, I want to just add on MinDat. I mean, I find it very useful, but I also, when I start talking to the friends I have that actually go collecting, they're also the ones who go, no, they're not going to put the information on MinDat because they don't want other people to find it. So that makes it harder.
Yes, yeah.
So maybe it's good for old mines where we know it all, but not new ones.
Yep, that's a good comment too, Dave. You can, of course, compare to MinDat photos to books, photos in books and so on, and see if you can see something that looks like what you're actually looking at. You can crowdsource, so things like Facebook groups. I've got this specimen, I'm not sure what it is, think it might be this, what do you think? But again, then the issue there is that you've got identification by photograph, which also is not ideal. Of course, you can phone a friend, you can find somebody that knows perhaps a little bit more than you do about particular minerals, group of minerals, localities, and so on. And then you have also what I've called local experts. And Jason Smith is a good example of that for particular mines over in the US. So, you know, there's a variety of things that you can do to do your background checking, get as far as you can to try and work out what you've got. Now, disclaimer here, I have currently in my catalogue, so catalogued minerals, I think I have over 100 that I've got marked as unknown. And the reason that they've been unknown for a while is because I haven't gone back and done this sort of research, which I should do, to try and find a better home for them, if you like.
I was just going to say, Steve, one of the things that I find very useful is looking up the geological map of the area where the mine is or the location is. And often there's associated geological reports. They can be quite old, but they can add a lot of information to the pile. And yeah, the scientific literature, often you'll find anything interesting has some sort of research done on it in the literature, if you know where to look. Sometimes it can be a bit hard to find, but
I totally agree. All right. So what can you do? Well, you've got visual methods. So you can look at things like the color, the luster, the transparency, and so on. If you can get your head around, you know, what a triclinic versus a monoclinic form might look like, you can look at crystal systems and various habits. You can look at cleavage and fractures, and particularly if you've got a bit of damage on the specimen. There's a particular look that some specimens have, and I'm one of the people that has a good memory for having seen things before in the mineral world, and I can look at something and say, well, I think that looks like something I've seen before, and I can compartmentalize that and, you know, try and bring out what I've seen. Doug, one for you. Fluorescence can actually be a good tool to use. one of the issues there is a database of fluorescent minerals, which is quite useful, but it's now quite dated with the advent of things like the convoy and so on, which can show fluorescence in minerals that didn't show fluorescence under previous lamps and things like that. So it's always a caveat empty.
And just to add to that, I've looked at, if you're talking about Fluomin, like I've looked at where they get their references and where they get, you know, some of their stuff, and I can look back at it and go, this is just wrong. And then there was one time I told him, hey, the Oconite fluoresces, and he was excited about it. But then when I sent him a picture of it, I never got a response. So it's sort of hard with that. But I have learned lately that with the advent of the new LEDs, that there's a bunch of different kinds of fluorescence, and they actually are pretty good at identifying, going from shortwave to midwave to long wave to some of the other ones, that some of the stuff will then fluoresce, and you can then distinguish that there actually were 2 or 3 or 5 minerals there where it all looked like one.
Yep.
If you just looked in daylight. And so that can help.
Yep. That's very good. I suppose it comes back down to, it must be true. I read it on the internet. You find stuff and you've got to have ways of validating it. Mineral associations can be very useful. So, you know, the number of times that you're actually going to find a rare arsenate where it's a location that produces phosphates or whatever, you know, you've got to question what you've actually got. And then you get local knowledge. And because people have gone through this process with their own specimens from a particular locality, you may have someone that actually is very knowledgeable about a particular locality that your specimen comes from. And it comes back to the sort of, on the previous one, the contact local experts. It's a very similar thing. And then we have analytical methods, and there's a couple of different things to look at there. You can, for the most part, probably do a bit of vinegar, see if you get a reaction. You can test out magnetism. If you've got, and I've put a green tick against that because of the sort of ease of doing it. And then you've got a yellow tick for doing streak, hardness testing, SG, refractive index, because that is a little bit more difficult to do with micros in particular. And then you get into the more serious stuff in the home, and people like Paul will do some of this sort of stuff. Chemical tests, the old style blowpipe analysis and so on. But the best way probably is to look at professional and analytical methods. So we're going to hear a little bit about, I always said Raman, but Raman is probably correct. And particularly if you've got contacts, so Steve and I have both used Kerry Day in the past. Now, even though his equipment was quite old, it still gave you an indication, if not an identification, and would give you, more chances of narrowing down what you have. But if you've got contacts at your local museum or university, or you're prepared to spend a fair bit of money, with people like Georgia Sora and others, but ideally you need to try and work it out for yourself first.
It's another area where having local contacts or local experts is very useful.
Absolutely.
But part of the problem with the analytic methods is that a lot of those are destructive.
Correct. Yes. That's actually another downer. Yeah, definitely. All right, just on to a couple of case studies then. This was my first one, and I got quite excited about this. These are quite glassy little prismatic yellow crystals of an unknown mineral, and it's sitting on topaz. And I actually had about 4 or 5 pieces of topaz or crystals of topaz with this material on it. And it comes from a place called the Hairy Peruvian Mine, which is an interesting mine for an Australian locality. It was originally an open cut tin tungsten mine, and Mendat shows limonite, quartz, topaz, and wolframite. So for me, the geological environment and the thinking that I had was that maybe this was some sort of bismuth or tungsten secondary mineral. And I couldn't find anything that really sort of matched, but I was keen to find out what it was. But when I did manage to get a piece XRD'd, it showed only goethite. And I looked at that, and this was Ralph Bottrell in Tasmania that did the analysis. And I spoke to Ralph and I said, goethite just doesn't sound right for, crystals that are transparent and
Not for color,
lustrous.
not for crystals.
Yeah, it's a beautiful piece. But not long after, Ralph came back with the actual identification, and it's Humboldtine.
Aha.
And what's
Organic.
actually, somebody's actually put this topaz into oxalic acid,
Yeah.
and the Humboldtine has grown. So he was me very super excited about finding something potentially new, and it was man-made.
Yeah, it's man-made. Yeah,
But it's still pretty cool, I have to say.
it actually is pretty cool.
It is. The second case study that I've got is a different approach. It was not me trying to identify something that I had. It was me trying to identify something that I didn't have. So in Para-2 in South Australia, which has quite a few rare earth species and is the type locality for Para-2ite and decrespinite, there was a new mineral described either late last year or early this year called Alice Wilsonite with yttrium and lanthanum, and that should be a capital L. It's obviously Microsoft doing its auto correct. And it's a very new mineral. There is an Alice Wilsonite YCE, which I think is a Mont Saint-Hilaire one, and there are a couple of images of that on Mindat. But I didn't know whether this new one actually looked similar or different or whatever. And because I recently acquired quite a few specimens from Para-2 from the period when the collecting of the rare earth species occurred, I thought maybe I've got an Alice Wilsonite, maybe not. No photos were available, paper's not yet published, but I managed to get hold of one of the authors, Ina Likova, and she came back. I asked her, is it a similar habit to Alice Wilsonite YCE? And does it occur with other species, REEs or otherwise? And she came back with, it occurs as pink to colorless thin tabular pseudo-hexagonal crystals, usually no more than 1 millimeter in size, together with Camporgite Y. Now, out of the 150 specimens that I got from Para-2, probably 100 have got Camporgite on. So I thought, okay, I've got a bit of a chance here. So I haven't gone through all of them yet, but I've been through probably about 80%. And I have one specimen that just might look enough like Alice Wilsonite to be Alice Wilsonite. But I don't know. It's a couple of crystals that are sort of partially buried under other stuff, and it's quite hard. I can see, maybe I want to see, but I think I can see a sort of a hexagonal outline, which is quite different to the other stuff around it. But that's the process that I've been trying to go through to come up with the possibility of a specimen of a brand new mineral called Alice Wilsonite. All right, I'll do stop share. I don't know whether any of that is there any comments on that?
Is Dick still with us?
Sorry?
Yes, Steve, Steve, I have a comment.
Yes, Jim.
Oh, I'm really glad that you pointed out that you need to understand the geologic system. That's a lot of things that most people do not do. They don't think about what else is there. I've been an exploration geologist for 50 years. and a mineral collector since I was 10. And one of the things that is really important is to understand that the mineral world is nothing more than nature's expression of physical chemistry.
Yeah.
The solution diagrams, the stability fields, that's all comes down to what you see. And if you understand the chemical system or of the area where you're working, you'll know that just because you see a green hexagonal prism and it's not necessarily pyromorphite. A yellow one's not necessarily mimetite. And so if you don't have any phosphates in the system, your first guess should be mimetite, not pyromorphite.
Yep. It does get a bit complex, of course, when you get environments where there's a lot of complexity in what's there, like Broken Hill. But because there you've got potentially phosphohedrophane as well, and as well as pyromorphite and mimetite. But visually, you can usually pick the mimetites, but not completely certain.
And beyond that, there's paragenesis. Usually in those multi-systems, either the phosphate was earlier or the arsenate was earlier.
Mhm.
And so they're not coincident.
Yep.
Right.
All of that.
That's very good points. Thank you, Jim. All right. Any other comments about that sort of basic view? Yes, Arlene, if you want to unmute.
Yes,
Yep.
I find that I lamped everything for shortwave and for longwave fluorescence for identification purposes. However, I find that MinDat is way lacking in that information. They don't even say that a mineral is fluorescent under any conditions for a lot of them. And I think it's a very good tool for identification purposes in some places. And I have the long and the short. And I wish more people would contribute more information to MinDat, including the fluorescent diagnosis.
I think a lot of people are starting to do that, in fact.
Oh, good.
Especially with the very portable lights that are available, and an understanding that if you combine color sometimes from short and long on the same specimen, you're not necessarily hitting other species, but you're actually hitting a different response color.
Yeah.
And the other thing, I recently identified a barite, I think, and this is combining things with the local expert, that was in an old collection. It's absolutely spectacular, but it fluoresces white and phosphoresces green. So it starts white, turn off the light, and you've got a green phosphorescence. One fairly elderly gentleman said, yes, that's from South Dakota. Now I have to go further, but he had specimens of that sort that he collected a long time ago. And this is from an old collection.
So calcite.
So I think there's a lot of interesting things people are starting to do, including understanding the geology. I help out with the young Toronto mineralogists, and this is what I'm stressing to them all the time, because they have a what's it section, and they'll come up with ideas of what this specimen might be, that once they start to learn something about geological setting, they wouldn't guess any longer. And that is, so all these very basic things that you learn that were presented, I just wish everyone who collects minerals could get that far, that they really start to link all this together. It really helps.
Just a couple of comments on that. One is there's a hell of a lot of calcites that I've been finding with the convoy in particular that fluoresce that bright white and have a green afterglow as well. It's very common in some environments. And Arlene, I'll just share this one. So this is the one that Doug, I think you were talking about before.
Yeah.
Fluomin. Now, again, it's not ideal, but it's a good indication. So, and I have actually been in touch with the guy that runs this, and he did respond to me. Maybe that's you, Doug, I don't know. But it's another way of, another tool that you can have that can help you in your sort of overall kit bag of things. Again, sometimes it comes down to elimination. You think it might be something, but if you find it, then reasons why it can't be that, that gives you a little step further towards identifying what you've actually got.
Exactly.
One other thing that I was going to say as well, and I've probably been guilty of this in the past too, is a lot of people, particularly when it comes down to dealers, a lot of people rely on the dealer label or identification for what they've got, and that's not necessarily what it is.
True.
Again, not usually people trying to defraud or whatever, but sometimes it's honest mistakes as well. Not always, but sometimes. But dealers can be guilty of, I really want it to be this, therefore it is, just as much as collectors.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the dealer's fault half the time too, because if they're buying from overseas, then they're not necessarily buying directly from the mine. They're buying from people who contact miners, and it's often difficult to get accurate information, either because people are trying to protect their sources, or because they just don't know, or because everything just gets bundled together without any differentiation between the source and the destination.
There can be an opposite effect to that, and that is that if you ever happen to inhabit metaphysical people and metaphysical things, they will get job lots from various suppliers, and occasionally you'll get the odd thing in there, and you think, I know what that is, and they don't.
Yeah,
you can get a few bargains that way.
Like Coxonite inclusions in quartz.
Yeah.
Can I say something?
You can, Frank.
All right. I agree with your methods of searching, but what I find helpful is, Paul mentioned it earlier, if you have a way to go around searching things on the internet, you can get a lot of information from science studies of particular places, areas. So did I find, well, I didn't bought the book from Mont-Saint-Hilaire, but I found a piece of the University of Montreal, who did a study there a few years back, and they have a very large portion available for the public, and it shows the different paragenesis, which Jim said, and then you know where you can find pieces. So if you got albite, you probably wouldn't find it in the Groac, and things like that. So it helps a lot, but you have to know how to search the internet.
Yes, this is true. That's very good.
Tony, can I say something about? Sorry. Can I say something about the MKA? That's a mineral group in Antwerp, and they have on their site quite a lot of information about fluorism. So you can find a lot of things about color. I think it's a little bit more than what you showed, Steve, on your site. So I would say you can have a look on MKA, the Mineralogische Kring Antwerpen, and you can see a lot more about fluorescences.
Hang on, I think Liz gone? Right, go, Doug.
So regarding the MKA site, that's all helpful, but chances are the colors they're looking at, he's actually trying to figure out the activators. So it's not that it's calcite or calcite, because it is all calcite, but they one of them has different, a different activator in them. So it doesn't necessarily help you identify the mineral. So.
Well, sometimes, well, not not always, but it says quite a lot of different minerals and the color of it. It's not on calcite. It's not very helpful. I agree with that. But on the other minerals like Mount Saint Hilaire or something like that, then it can help you with color more than that.
Yeah, I was going to show this. Can everybody see this? It's very, very tiny print. It's an incredible number of pages, but every single species in Mont Saint Hilaire has been put into this database by Tony Steed. And this sits by my desk when I go through Mont Saint Hilaire, which is a headache. But,
you have to go one night.
Yeah, I mean, it does everything, including associated minerals, a description, the fluorescence, you know, and all sorts of properties. It's remarkable how useful it is, but also how frustrating it can be. But it's certainly a tool. So I don't know if it's available more widely. I don't know if it's similar to what was mentioned from Montreal, but constantly updated, I can say that.
Where did you get that, the spreadsheet?
Every time we have a CMMA, a Canadian Micromineral Association meeting, Tony will usually have a few of these, sometimes older, sometimes if there have been enough updates, it'll be a new version. So, but that's the sort of thing. This is where we're putting everything together, where we have a lot of experts on a particular locality, pulling their information together in a usable manner that you can work with while you're actually at your table with your microscope, with your lights, with everything that you have to try figuring things out.
There's a bit of a theme here between something Steve said earlier and the discussion on MinDat and that tabulated data, which is that familiarity with a location and a set of species. Eventually you get your eye in and you start to be able to distinguish those that can be distinguished.
Yes.
So yeah, see as many specimens as you can and you might get a little better at identifying stuff.
I beg to differ. So I got 2,175 different species, and probably 100 or so are wrongly classified. But it still is difficult, especially in micros. So.
Well, I mean, you know, you can stop any time.
No,
well, I love it when they change things. You know, you have a whole mess of stuff labeled, and then you have to relabel it all, and then or it's an either or and you're going, oh.
So we were having a chat about this, and I've got the opinion that no, you don't have to relabel anything. Just go with the flow. As long the single most important piece of information on your specimen is the location.
Exactly.
Everything else is extra.
Yeah.
Doug, you have to unmute.
So both a bonus and a curse with me is my son's in graduate school and he has access to stuff. So I can send him things and then he can ignore them instead of actually doing what I want. But he had the bonus and then the frustration of he identified this one, he found this one crystal in a specimen that had been cut and polished and section and all that. And using the scanning electron microscope, identified what's in it. And it's an integral amount of atoms off of something that's known. But that doesn't mean we know that he did it right. Doesn't know that it's actually something. So we're then like, all right, we think we know it's something and not anything that is in MinDat or in any of the databases, but that doesn't mean we actually know that we're right and not just confused. And so other than sending it off to Tony Camp or something like that, it's like, well, I don't know. Hopefully at some point in his career, he will know what to do, but it is frustrating. And going to the, I don't know if you were going to talk about XRF at all. I know I mentioned the past occasionally I have one and it has shown me that a lot of my labels are wrong. It doesn't tell me what things are, but it's pretty good at telling me that they're not what I think it is, because it's like that element is not in there, so it can't be that.
That's just
Something
part
like
of
that.
the process.
Yeah, so some of those things are good at saying something's not. I just put a case in Tucson, and I had minerals that were fluorescent green from Sweden, and I'm like, I don't know what this is. Oh, is this radioactive? But I have a Geiger counter, and it's not. And then I don't know what eventually I'm like, screw it. I put a little hydrochloric acid and it goes crazy. So I'm like, I guess it's calcite, but even that's wrong, because it's just a carbonate. I don't know if it's calcite. It could be a carbonate. Yeah. Then we go to freezing cold hydrochloric acid versus hot vinegar. And it just can be very complicated, especially if the specimen's that big.
Yeah. Exactly.
Sometimes you can only go best guess.
There is one other method you can use that will absolutely guarantee a positive identification, and that's to claim that your specimen is the rarest of the rare specimens of that location and publish it widely, and eventually somebody will tell you what it actually is pretty quickly. Ask me how I know.
Is it barite, Paul?
Always.
We might, in the interest of time, bring Jim's little presentation into this on Raman. Jim, if you're ready to do it, you want to share the screen?
I can noodle that.
Excellent. Yep, we're good. We can see your presentation.
Okay. First of all, let me say that I think I've gotten myself into one of the best volunteer jobs available in the world. I've been volunteering for the last 4 years with Dr. Young and Bob Downs on the RUF project, which is compiling a database for Raman spectroscopy at the University of Arizona. So this is a very quick and dirty overview of Raman spectroscopy. How does Raman work? It's the very simple answer. It's a very complex process involving vibrations, magnetism, and what it's really looking at is the vibration of the bonds between atoms in a mineral or compound. So if we start thinking about this as like a barbell, what are the things that would affect the vibration frequencies? First, the bond strength. Is it, if the bar is thicker, it's stronger than if the bar is thinner? The length of the bond will make a difference in the vibration frequencies. The atomic weights on each end of the bond will vary depending upon and the influence of other atoms within the unit cell of the mineral. Because every time we have movement of electrical ions, we're creating not only electrical fields, but magnetic fields. And so we're looking at basically a very complex combination of chemistry and structure. So how does it work? The laser intersects the specimen, and the reflected vibration frequencies are channeled through an interferometer into a computer that then sorts it out into a spectrum with a whole bunch of, by using channels within this collecting frequency, versus intensity. Intensity is just the number of counts within that range of frequencies. So we end up with spikes and peaks. Low and high, the higher vibration frequencies give you a peak. But these peaks aren't single lines because there's a overlap. These bonds don't vibrate all at the same frequency. And so you have a tapering off, which has to do with the physics of the compound. So here's our unit in Arizona. This is the collector. The lasers are in the second part, the white part here. The computer generates data onto this screen. So this is open. You have to shield the laser because of safety measures. And so here I have what looks like a Caledonite that I want to check these little bluish green crystals. However, this piece is too big to put in to get under the microscope as it is. So I have to be resourceful. So what I do is, instead of putting it in, we normally use rice because rice allows you to position your specimen however you like without damaging anything and without sticking to the specimen. Some people use clay or tack, but if you are looking at the backside of a specimen that has fine crystals on it, you don't want to put tack on the crystals. So I've propped this one underneath there and used a plate to kind of hold it in place while I check these crystals. There's a maximum of 3 centimeters between the table and the bottom of the objective. And so you can use a longer specimen like this Conicalcite here. There's no problem with long as long as it's thin. You can do I can do thumbnails within the box that they're there without disturbing without having to dismount the thumbnail. So what kind of things give us good and poor spectra? What does it work on? It works very well on transparent, translucent. Some sulfur salts like this ruby silvers work fine. Some sulfides like sphalerite work fine. The laser has to be able to penetrate into the specimen, the crystal, and return so that you can get a signal. If it reflects off the surface of the crystal, you get nothing. So things that don't work are most sulfides and sulfur salts, metals. If you have a very thin crust of very fine or crystals, that doesn't work because you don't get enough reflection back from the specimen to get a good spectrum. And non-crystalline things like cryptocrystalline material like chalcedony or chrysocolla, mineraloids like opal and obsidian, and metamix structures like rare specimens, samarskite, gadoliniite, or some of the rest of those will give you no spectrum at all. So I missed one. There we go. So here's the setup on once you put the specimen in, you get this preview. In this case, we're not seeing any peaks showing up. So this is either a fluorescence issue or a flooding issue where you get too much return. So we have two lasers. We have a 532 nanometer and a 780 nanometers. The 780 is red and the 532 is green. So we can choose the other laser in this case, and maybe we'll get it won't fluoresce, just like some specimens fluoresce with in our fluorescent light ultraviolet range, one color with one or none with one and one with the other. Same thing happens with this laser. We can choose the laser power setting. So if we're burning the specimen, if we burn a 2 micron hole in the specimen, you want to cut the power down. So there's units we can cut the power down. High and low resolution. The low resolution gives you OH, hydrocarbons, things like that. High resolution is what we use 90% of the time. The magnification in our unit is 100, a minimum of 100x and 500x. 500x you can't use on a specimen because the clearance is so low you can't get any light in there. We have to use, for the 500x, we have to use a single crystal picked off of the specimen on a aluminum plate. So as you collect the spectrum, this is the prelim, and then this is after 10 seconds. This, you can see these are refining and getting better and better resolution on the spectrum. This is 100 seconds. And then this is a comparison with a known specimen on from the database. Interpreting the spectra, we use software that statistically matches your unknown spectrum with spectra in a database. We use Crystal Sleuth is the one that is written, and it's actually free from the University of Arizona. You use it to remove background, match the databases, and you can use it to sort out multiple species. And where you get multiple species is when you have a transparent mineral. A lot of times, if you don't take that crystal off and are trying to do it on a specimen without damaging a crystal, you get whatever's behind it as a partial spectra as well. Oh, here again, that's from the output gives you 10 choices with the OMEC and the machine, and complete database of choices with Crystal Sleuth. And so here's where my knowledge of mineralizing systems is important, because you'll get things that are absolutely impossible, as sometimes is the first match. So people that just read off I've had people come in and read off the first answer, and no way in hell that's right, because that can't be there.
Yeah.
And the peak heights vary in this because we're using a polarized laser, so you're only getting reflections in one direction. So orientation of the specimen makes a big difference in the peak heights. They're usually there, but they may not be as in the oriented specimen that's in the database. Here's an example that I did Monday. We were looking at that Conicalcite that I showed you a picture of. Has some clear to white crystals on top of the green Conicalcite. Turns out they give a spectra for conicalcite. Interesting. Never saw a clear conicalcite in my life. What they really are is adelite, which is the other end member of the conicalcite group, adelite group. So adelite is a clear member of that group. And so we figured out that we were actually looking at adelites over conicalcite. So in summary, in general, Raman is non-destructive. It's quick. It takes about 15 minutes per analysis for a quick and dirty answer. But then there's post-processing that probably takes another half hour, depending upon how complex it is, because you have to reduce the background and then you have to recompare and make sure that you've got all the peaks covered and you don't have anything extra. It's reliable as long as you have an excellent database. You have to have a database that has multiple analyses for the same species from different localities. Because of the peak height and the way this works, there'll be a little bit of shift in peaks for different localities. And you're only analyzing a 2-micron spot. So you can get variations in crystals from one end to the other or across the axis. It's not good for, you cannot reliably do any metals or sulfides. You can't separate some groups like this, like I showed you with the adelite. The database is incredibly important. Small specimen size and clearance is a problem because you can't put a big, huge crystal in there. If you have a little micro something on the side of it, it's going to then become destructive. And there's see-through issues, like I told you before, on transparent things. A quick word about the rough database that we're building here in Arizona. We have a cabinet, several cabinets, like the one on the left that are locked. Within that, there are drawers, and the specimens are filed numerically. The Raman numeric system is year, and then the specimen number for that year. And the verified specimens, here you can see on some of these smaller ones here, there's a little metal pedestal in there. That's a single crystal mount that we've used to describe the specimen with a single crystal X-ray and a structure. Dr. Young is incredibly good at doing these things. And so rough database is the final result. And it's a really fun place to work.
Cool.
Thanks.
Excellent.
Very good.
So
good.
Interesting.
Very
So now,
good.
Richard, you know what to do now, Richard. You're all set up.
Yeah, right.
Do you want to do the stop share, Jim?
Yeah, I got to figure out where it is.
It should be up the top, I think.
I lost the page.
Actually, I can do it from here. So
Okay.
yeah, there you go. That was
very good.
Very, very, very interesting.
Mm.
So do you consider, Jim, if your laser intensity is too high and you drill a little 2-micron hole, do you consider that to be destructive?
Well, if the crystal's a thumbnail crystal and you've got a 2-micron hole in part of it, you're never going to see it.
Yeah, but you might know it's there though.
You might know it, sir. I happen to know that there's a very famous Proustite that has a 2-micron hole all the way through it.
Okay.
I didn't do it,
Right.
but I know who did do it.
So, Doug, go on, you go.
So my son worked at Sterling Hill for a month, and he was doing Raman, and they had a different setup, and it was a pharmaceutical Raman, and they were trying to get into the game with the rocks, and so they gave it to the Sterling Hill at a deep discount, but there was no database, so it was a pain in the butt. But the whole point was that a lot of the stuff at Sterling Hill and Franklin were unique anyway, and they were trying to build the database of that. But the reason I even brought it up is that they had a different setup with the microscope on a pole, so they could get a much bigger specimen under there.
Yeah, this Raman is 15 years old. There's no longer parts for it.
Ooh.
The camera doesn't work, and so I can't take pictures of what I'm shooting, which is a real pain in the ass.
Frank?
Yeah, Jim.
Yeah.
Is there a difference between localities in the same mineral? I guess there is.
Yes,
And it's
there is,
only
because there's always minor impurities.
Yeah, probably from the impurities, but the frequency should be matching.
Yeah, reasonably so.
Yeah.
But I was going to put together an example for you, but I tried to keep it very short.
Great. It was great.
I could do a longer presentation at some point and show you. When you have groups like mimetite, paramorphite, vanadinite, because you're looking at different radical groups, then you're looking at separate peak areas that shift.
Yeah.
Versus impurities in calcite. We probably have 50 calcite analyses.
Yeah.
And they're all reasonably the same, but some are different.
Yep. I understand. Thanks.
How often do you get specimens, Jim, that turn out to be nothing like what they're supposed to be? Like somebody says to you, I've got a specimen of X, and if you want to try and...
I've been going through my own things. 15% of mine that I go in there with are not what I thought they were.
Yeah.
Monday we were looking at tungstates, and we were looking at tungstenite as an example. And so I had a piece of pegmatite from Rwanda with supposedly a tungstenite. It did not look like the tungstenite in the Raman. It didn't even come close. So we did a single crystal on it, right, Monday afternoon. And it turned out it was cubic. Tungstenite is orthorhombic, if I remember right. So Young took it down to the SEM lab. It turns out that it has a lot of sodium in it and a little iron and aluminum. So when we finished working the whole thing out, it turns out it's hydroxy, keno, elzamorite.
Wow.
So it's a little bit of yellow stuff then.
Yeah. So those kind of things happen we've been looking at El Dragon material for the selenites and have found at least 2, maybe 3 new minerals that will be described in the next month or so.
Excellent. That's
so we've done a lot of new minerals, and it's been really fun. And it's not part of the university. The university does not supply any funds The lab was set up privately. The university only supplied space, and they used to supply Dr. Young's salary, but now no more. So we're all on our own. So there's 4 volunteers and Dr. Young. Each one of us works 1 day a week. And when we don't have stuff that we need to do for the project, we can do our own.
Nice, Jim.
Very good.
That's very, very good. All right. Any other questions from Jim or anything else that people wanted to raise? I'm just conscious we're 7:10 here nearly, so.
You were talking about the calcite that phosphoresced green. Do you know what the activator is? I think it was you.
Yes, it was. I'm not sure.
I think those tend to be, I think someone said humic acids or something like that.
Oh,
Something that used to, so for example, a terlingua type calcite might, well, it actually glows blue if you do a shortwave and take it off. But there's some stuff that's green. I know they'll say that, oh, the calcite formed underground, and when it was underground, there was something living above it that died, and then some of that organic stuff got incorporated in there, and that is what's likely causing the green.
yeah. I'm of course trying to figure out what's activating the barite. So yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, thank
Liz,
you.
I can't help you on that one.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else?
I have a question on that adelite spectrum, and I'm asking this out of ignorance, not challenging your conclusions, but how do you know any of that spectrum was the adelite and not just the kind of calcite that was the background for it?
Because we took the crystal off and put it on an aluminum plate and did it at 500x. So there was absolutely nothing else behind it.
Thank you.
Then we checked it quickly, crystal, with a single crystal camera, and it came out with the adelite unit cell.
Okay. Anything else before we wrap up? Everybody find this one useful?
Very good.
Very
Very good.
Interesting. Yeah, very good.
Very good.
So your challenge, should you wish to accept it, is to find those unknowns, as I will at some point in my collection, and try and do a bit of research on them and see what you can come up with.
Yeah, or just chuck it on Facebook and see what everybody thinks.
Yeah, well, there is that.
Actually,
everybody here.
That's a non-starter most of the time, that.
I'll have to wait until the symposium in the autumn, because I'll be bringing loads of trifles and stuff up there. That's a very good environment actually for that, because I mean, you're not doing any kind of detailed examination, but the room is full of experts from all over the world. Yeah. And you've got 3 days to annoy them with your stuff that you don't know what it is. So
that could be a very effective sales technique. What's in this one? I don't know. It's from this famous location, but I don't know what's in it.
Absolutely.
I know, $50.
I must admit, very early on in my collecting career, if you could call it a career, when I was learning as much as I could, and I was sucking up information. I had a friend of mine who started about the same time as me, but wasn't quite as enthusiastic. And he would ring me up and say, "I've got this green stuff. Can you tell me what it is?" And no photos or anything even at that stage.
Green stuff, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Sorry, Jim.
If anybody has extra crystal specimen of something that they want identified and are willing to give us a piece, we'll be glad to work on it. But we need to, especially if it's new or different, we'll need the piece for the reference, for the rough reference collection.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah. So if you've got more than one, that's good. If you've only got one, it's a bit problematic. But
yeah.
I've got some, but they're very small. I need to isolate them a little bit.
I know someone who's got a laser that can cut very small specimens in half.
Yeah.
All right. On that note, we'll finish up. As I said at the beginning, if there's anybody got any ideas on what we might be able to have as future sessions, please contact me offline and we can talk about that. Doug's already gone. I'll talk to him. I won't put any extra pressure on him, but he is particularly good with the fluorescence, and I think that would be something that would be useful. So we'll see where we go for that. And thank you all for attending again. David Garsky, nice to see you again. And we'll see you all in 2 weeks' time.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
All right.
Take care. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Until next time.
Bye.